back to another episode of Inspired By. Today I want to talk to you about why you might be interested in creating Synthwave again and how you can do it. If you're a subscriber, you probably already know who Lofi is, but you may or may not know that for the first time ever, they launched a brand new 24-hour stream. This new stream isn't quite as popular as their Study Beats playlist just yet, and that's probably a good thing for you, the creator. Most of the feedback for the new stream has largely been positive, and the criticism seems to be that there isn't enough tracks inside it yet. That's until you come in. Lofi is definitely going to be on the lookout for new tracks to feature in their 24-hour stream, and if history is anything to go by, they're also going to be working on an album of sorts as well. Creating a body of work in this style is going to help you get onto their radar. So let's dive into what sounds you want to focus on. Okay, so with this particular project, I had loads of fun. It's probably going to sound quite weird when we start things off because I've made some very intentional choices. Bear with me on this one, and let's start with the drum sound. We're working at a rate of 104 BPM, and I'm using about 4 drum one-shots inside my drum rack. Oh, whilst I remember, as always, the stems and the project from this episode will be available at my Patreon, but I'll also make a blank Synthwave template for you guys made up of only Ableton instruments to help you get started too. So enjoy those things this week. Let me know how you get on. A lot of these sounds I've pitched down, so we started things off with this bright future house kick drum. You can see here that I've transposed it down 3 semitones. That's going to be a reoccurring theme for today. It's initially quite bassy and quite bright, but I'm adding that EQ8 inside that envelope there just to make it a little bit more muted, a little bit dull, and I'm also preserving the transient, setting that forward mode and the envelope to 90 just to take off a little bit of that excess kind of overtone. As we go over to the snare, we're doing a similar thing, preserving those transients, envelope on 85, transposition on -7 this time round initially. Much brighter than what we heard. EQ8 there, and I'm also sending this snare to the reverb. This is a hybrid reverb, and you're just sending it to the return devices down here. I haven't got this send all the way up, and I am also EQing that reverb just to get rid of some of that muddiness. So we need to get the brighter spray from the snare. Moving down to the hi-hats, it actually came from a much longer sample. But I didn't want any of that delay stuff, so we're just using the first one shot here. A slight fade at the start of the sample, really preserving those transients. Again, pitching it down on transposition here at -4 semitones. With the EQ8, we're making it a little less bright here. And for the first time, we see the sidechain compressor that's linked to that kick drum pre-effects. Again, this is going to be a theme for our other instruments moving forward. Our piano roll is looking like this with a very simple beat to start us off. Kick and snare, with the occasional open hi-hat. And that open hi-hat is being choked by the first hi-hat that we see. So you can see this choke group here. You can open it up in input and output, and we're just setting the open hi-hat and the closed hi-hat to choke group 1. You'll also notice when I zoom in, I'm just delaying these hi-hats a little bit. That's going to give it a slightly lazy feel. And a great way to preview this as the drums are playing is just to grab this bracket icon and slowly move your hi-hats to the right. I liked it just offset a few milliseconds from that initial downbeat, and you'll also notice that every other hi-hat beat has a slightly quieter velocity to add a more humanistic feel. Those drums are sitting in a track with just a slight EQ8 here to roll off any of those subs for our bass later and to take away a little bit of that muddiness that's coming from the kick drum. From here, I'm going to move down to our melodic group, and the first thing you'll notice is it says +4, and that's because all of my instruments are going to be pitched 4 semitones up from the preview heard at the beginning. This is super intentional, and if you stick around to the end, you'll see for why. I'm starting things off with this analog synth here. It's a mix of a square and sawtooth wave, but I'm making sure that I automate a few of the parameters as the track builds. This is going to give it a lot of movement. Sounds like this. The initial chord progression was in E flat major, but don't forget, we've pitched everything up 4 semitones. You'll notice some of these ghost notes that happen before the downbeat. Just gives an almost stuttery delayed effect. And speaking of delay, we have a delay sent to return 1. That's just a ping pong delay with a bit of filtering. And then we've got a sidechain compressor, which is linked to the instrument itself. It makes sure that the delay doesn't ever become too much for the signal that's coming in. From here, I'm adding a little bit of RC20 to give it that saturated feel, just the distortion and magnetic tape feel, so it feels like it's being run through an analog desk. I'm using chorus to make it a little bit wider. A little bit of reverb to wash it out. EQ8 to get rid of some of those muddy notes and boost the highs. We've got drum bus for an added bit of punch. Linking it to that kick drum. And then a little bit of auto pan automation every now and then as well. Now underneath I've got these ghost chords. I'm using pretty much the same devices but a slightly different EQ, and I'm using a Serum preset that I downloaded from GoGo Audio. That's just going to lift up the second half of this progression a little bit. Something that I've done underneath that I've noticed in some of the Lo-Fi Girl tracks is add an ARP, but I'm mainly automating that delay send that we saw from earlier. What I'm doing is automating the gain on utility to make sure that that instrument comes through from silent, and then just adds a little bit of delay to the mix every now and then. It makes this chord progression twinkle a little bit more and add that kind of ethereal touch. Underneath this, I've got a pad, again, another Serum patch, this time from Splice, with the saturator, sidechain compression once again, EQ8 to get rid of all of those muddy notes and lows, a little bit of gain automation, and then the auto pan. It sounds a little something like this. Keep an eye on the EQ8 and the auto pan automation. That auto pan automation really does ramp up the tension for this particular instrument. And finally, we've got the bass here. The bass here is just copying the lowest notes of the chords that we had from the beginning. You can hear a slight buzzing, and that's coming from the automation on the fill mix of the Serum preset, just towards every other downbeat. Then I'm adding the saturator, that sidechain compressor to the kick as always, occasionally automating the EQ8 and reducing the width on the utility to make it just a little bit less wide so our other instruments can be heard. So those instruments are pitched up 4 semitones, and on top of things I've got this lead that sounds like this. Another Serum preset, which is kind of a rounded source sound with envelope 1 linked to the drive of the filter and LFO 1 linked to things that are going to give it that kind of out of tune feel. So we've got things like the level, the warp position, the wavetable position, and the fine tune. It's going to give it that real uncertain lo-fi tuning. I'm also using Xfiz's free OTT tool just to boost the highs a little bit and add a little bit of loudness to this instrument. And then finally, rolling off the lows, because that OTT does add a little bit of low. Now, if you're still with me, this is the really exciting bit. DistroKid is, of course, our sponsor today. And like Lo-Fi Girl, they're switching up their visuals and their tools. We've just seen an update to promo cards, as well as additions such as Mixia, who I've featured on the channel before. That's going to help you master your tracks via AI. And we get things like Slaps, a free tool that helps you get your music in front of a wider audience. I release almost all my music with DistroKid, and if you want to jump on the platform and get 7% off your first year, then just use the link in the description below. If you're still with me, this is where it gets really exciting. At the top of the screen, I've got everything grouped into a master group. This master group has a little bit of EQ8 to get rid of some of the muddy frequencies, and RC20 with a tiny little bit of wobble, and a tiny bit of distortion. This is going to add just a little bit of fine tuning to your mix, because what you're going to do after is solo everything in this light blue section, so everything apart from your lead and your drums, and resample those instruments. Those resampled instruments are going to have RC20 added to them again, this time with a little bit of noise and a little bit more wobble. Those two fine-tuning devices are going to work against each other to give it that real uncertain lo-fi tone. I've then got a little bit of glue compression, EQ8, the sidechain compressor to the kick as always, and occasionally a little bit of auto filtering, which we can come back to. I keep this at the bottom of my project. I then double click on the audio clip and pitch it down -4 semitones. That's really going to give it that kind of Macintosh Plus kind of sound. If you know, you know. From here, you want to go into your lead and pitch that lead down 4 semitones so it matches the new key of your audio sample. The last thing you'll want to do is add your effects. I like to EQ this so it's a little bit more in keeping with the track, reverse it at the end so it makes a nice perfect loop. I like to add a little bit of reverb to that noise so it washes out the sound a little bit more. Throughout your arrangement, you might want to add a little bit of auto filtering just so that your lead instrument can be heard a little bit more, give some space to the mix. It's a super nice sound and pretty easy to make. Thanks so much for tuning in today, guys. Don't forget that you can grab the stems and the Frozen project from today's episode over at the Patreon, as well as a blank Synthwave template to help you get started. Real soon, I'll be releasing details of our community beat battle and what those prizes will be. And the only way to stay up to date is if you hit that subscribe button. As always, let me know what you want to see in future videos down in the comments. It's always nice to have a chat, and I'll see you next time.